Welcome to today's Audit Tuesday. So in this session, UTest will spotlight the latest D.o.D update on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, otherwise known as the CMMC program. So to help explain the subject, we're lucky enough to have Michael Andrews, Cyber Compliance and D.o.D expert. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Ashley. Hey, Garrett. Thanks for having me again. Glad to be here.
Greetings.
Thanks for coming. So first off, for the audience who doesn't know you, can you please introduce yourself to the Audit Tuesday audience?
Yes. So I do cybersecurity consulting here in Las Vegas. My company's called Yastis. We focus on reducing risk and increasing compliance for small and medium-sized businesses throughout the United States. I also have a long D.o.D background and still serving part-time as a cyberspace operations officer in the Ohio Air National Guard. So since we're talking about CMMC today, I'm going to be speaking from wearing my Yastis hat and not the government, since I'm not here on behalf of the government.
Perfect. So let's get started. So let's start from the very beginning. So what exactly is the CMMC and why should federal contractors care about it?
That's a good question. So for many years, when there were major issues within the government and the Department of Defense in the realm of cybersecurity, such as a data breach, it was found that most of the issues were coming from these contractors, right? Because the DoD throws billions of dollars per year at cybersecurity, and most contractors can't, right? Like a lot of the contractors are not technical at all. They might have one IT person. So they're all usually try to do their best, but they often can't. So a lot of the data breaches you may have heard about over the years that that it might appear to be from the government actually came from government contractors, and the government had enough of it, right? So they implemented CMMC to kind of close those gaps and put more emphasis on having those contractors do cybersecurity the way they're supposed to be doing it.
So this is a compliance framework the DoD is putting on the defense contractors to ensure cybersecurity standards and practices are upheld. Is that right?
Yes, it's not a law or anything like that. Not exactly a regulation. It's not a regulation. So it's a compliance framework put in place, and it stems from originally it was the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and that's which guided the contractor cybersecurity, and that's still built into this, right? So for level one, it requires the same 15 controls from the FAR, and then for level two, it adds in 110 controls from NIST 800-171, which pertains to protecting controlled unclassified information of the government. And then level three adds in 24 controls from NIST 800-172, which is a supplement to 171, and that pertains to the extra sensitive CUI that might be involved on a particular contract.
Okay, so there was a big announcement on October 15th regarding the final rule. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it came out on the 15th, and the final rule will go into effect mid-December of this year. And then that'll spell out the four phases of rollout for CMMC, right? Because you can't just snap your fingers and start everything in one day. This is such a mammoth program, both for the government to oversee and for the contractors to implement, right? It's a ton of work. So starting in January will be the first part, and that'll involve CMMC self-assessments for levels 1 and 2. And then they'll just add to it over the course of 4 years. And then in 2028, it'll be fully in effect for all contracts. There will be some waiver options, as there usually is in the government, because after all, sometimes it's impossible to comply with something, and you have to have a way to still get things done and for the government to execute their missions in those cases.
So obviously defense contractors should be taking this ruling seriously, right?
It's very serious because from a competitive perspective, if the bigger companies are doing it, it's going to be hard for you to compete with them if you don't do it as well. So you could get eliminated right off the bat. And then if you were to say you're doing it, it could be really bad if you're not doing it, because there's something called the False Claims Act that could come into effect. It's not a direct part of CMMC, but it does pertain to any government contract, right? So if you lie or do anything fraudulent, as part of seeking payment from the U.S. government, you could be subject to that, and there's fines that can come from that. One example we saw recently was an article Garrett shared a few months back at Georgia Tech, right? So they're highly technical, but apparently they had a CMMC contract and they gave a they self-assessed and said we're at a 98, which is really 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 good. And then however it happened, it came out that they weren't at a 98, nothing close to it, and they may have known that, and the government's suing them. And I haven't heard an update on it, but it may have already terminated the contract, or it could, right? So it's very important. And if you say you're doing it, you got to do it. And if you want more government business, you got to do it, right? And you don't have to do it all yourself. There's plenty of companies out there that can help you do it. There's the CMMC marketplace. There's plenty of companies like ours that can help you out in that area. So one way or another, it just has to be done, and it's very, very serious.
And the CMMC, they demand that enterprises quantify their access to CUI controlled unclassified information, right?
Yes. So it's important for the organization. Everyone, you always want to keep track of the data you have, right? Because you can't protect data if you don't know what data you have and where it is. So the companies that are CMMC compliant, interacting with CUI, should be tracking that, quantifying that. But it's also important for the government to do their part in that, right? Because after all, CUI is defined by the government. It's what there's 20 categories and over 100 subcategories to CUI, controlled unclassified information, and the government should be tagging it properly, right? So if they're going to send a document to a contractor, it should say CUI. It should be properly marked. And if a contractor sees it and they're looking through it and they don't see that, they should bring that up, right? Because while we know things should be marked, they're often not marked, and that makes everything harder, right? Because you should be able to look at these documents and quickly see that CUI, so you don't have to be an expert on this stuff and just know it yourself.
And Garrett, that's where UTest comes in, correct?
Absolutely. And we have a very easy to use and easy to train. And calling out you SMBs out there, Mike Andrews is trained on UTest. He took this over the weekend, we gave him the training docs, and he knocked it out. It's that easy, right? And what it does is quantify the access privileges you have given and forces an attestation, not from the identity manager, the person who's just running the Okta or the user ID or the AD, no, from the business owners. And then it creates a document trail that says, I, manager, attest that these people should have access to this resource. And that's what's required in the CMMC framework. But also it's what's relevant to all your other regulations. I don't care if it's ISO 27001, GDPR, HIPAA, HITRUST, the financial regulations, etc. It quantifies the access in an easy to use, easy to flow access.
And Mike, so what Garrett just said, is that relevant to the CMMC requirements?
Oh yeah, it's highly relevant to CMMC, both in terms of a compliance perspective, but really just in managing your risk in general, right? Because a lot of cyber risk is tied to faulty identity practices, whether it's maybe weak authentication or your groups and roles just being out of whack because you haven't looked at them in a few years. And if anyone has done a big review, say you're at an organization of a 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 people, having to stay on top of those groups and roles, it is a massive, massive effort. And I've seen that firsthand many times. I've had to lead that, and it took months. And so that's why I was really interested in UTest when I saw it, because it makes it so much quicker, automates a lot of it. It gets you the records that you need to make sure things are done right and to keep those records over time. And it involves the managers of the people, right? Because if you're the cybersecurity team, you may not know what's going on in the different sections, right? You don't know if Tim from accounting is moved over to bookkeeping or some other team or became a manager. And when you enter a role or leave a role, those groups and roles should change, but unfortunately they do not, because organizations are very good at granting the access, not as good as removing the access, right? The access often builds up over time, and then they wait until the account needs to be deleted or just disabled when the person leaves the company. And really, that should be managed on a recurring basis. So using UTest to do at minimum your yearly user access review, or even better, quarterly, is really smart. But if you say you go through a merger, that's also a good time to do it, right? So if you have a big change in scope, UTest is a tool that can really make it easy on you during those times.
So you could provide services around UTest to help enterprises meet the CMMC controls around identity attestation, right?
Oh yeah, a bunch of controls related to CMMC, and pretty much every framework pertains to identity, and those are often the most important and the most difficult to stay on top of, because the stuff changes so much in these organizations, like I just mentioned. So I really liked UTest when I first heard of it, and then when Garrett shared the documentation about it, it was just really simple, straightforward. And then when I did the training, it took not even 2 hours, like something like an hour or something like that. And then when Garrett afterwards was like, "Do you have any questions?" I'm like, "No, I don't have any questions. It's just really easy to use. Like it's easier than using LinkedIn. It's super it's super simple." So
Yeah.
if someone thinks it could help, I would definitely recommend at least trying it out.
So I know people from the audience are going to want to get in touch with you. How can they reach you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn every day at my name, Mike Andrews. That's Andrewes. That's the best place to do it. Or you could also reach me at mike@yastis.com. That's YASTIS. And very collaborative person. So please just reach out anytime.
Perfect. And then we at UTest can be reached at utest.com, or of course, just email us at info@utest.com. Thank you, Mike, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you, Ashley. Thank you, Garrett. Have a good day.
Peace out. Bye.